The ability to have somebody who is kind of epitomizes what you think your country stands for, ambition. People don't change that much. I think they recognize those people whose commitment has been constant.
During the repair of Kensington Palace, Princess Anne found something shocking. She bowed her head and began to cry. What was supposed to be ordinary maintenance supervising turned into an unforgettable moment for the princess and the entire royal family. The details of this heartbreaking discovery will leave everyone in shock. People think secrets vanish when someone dies. That time smooths things over. That silence is the same as peace. That is a comforting lie. Some secrets are patient. They wait in locked rooms, waiting in objects passed over 1,000 times. They wait for the one person who was meant to find them. Imagine Princess Diana, known for her big heart and helping others, was secretly a brave detective, uncovering a huge, dangerous secret. She hid clues, wrote letters, and recorded tapes, all leading to a shocking truth that cost her everything. Now, after many years, her sister-in-law, Princess Anne, finds these hidden messages. Princess Diana had been gone for 27 years when the room was found. It happened during routine repair work at Kensington Palace, the kind of quiet maintenance that never makes it to headlines. Workers were replacing old wiring behind a sealed wooden wall, a section of the palace believed to be part of an abandoned storage space. When the panel came loose, it revealed something no one expected. The workers found a narrow room that had been untouched, sealed, and forgotten since the last days of Princess Diana's life.
And fashion isn't my big thing at all.
The air inside was stale, like it had been holding its breath for decades. The inside of the room was small, barely wide enough for two people to stand comfortably. Dust clung to every surface. Old evening gowns hung from the racks. They were from a time that was already in the past. Shoes were lined neatly as if waiting for their owner to return. Boxes of handwritten notes sat stacked carefully, not thrown away, not packed for storage. They were simply preserved. It felt less like a storage room and more like a freeze in time. When Buckingham Palace was informed, the response was swift and quiet. There was no pressure conference or public announcements. One name was spoken, and only one: Princess Anne. She was chosen for a reason. Anne had built her life on discipline and duty. She did not chase attention. She did not speak carelessly. She understood silence better than most people understand noise. If anyone could be trusted to walk into that room without panic or drama, it was her. At first, Anne, the Princess Royal, treated it like any other royal task. She took inventory, did the documentations of the preserved items, and instructed the servants to look over them, nothing more. But that changed the moment she stepped inside. The stillness of the room unsettled her. It was not abandoned in chaos. It was well arranged in a deliberate way. Diana had not left this space behind in a hurry. She had arranged it, curated it, and probably protected it. Anne had always struggled with her feelings about Diana. In public, Diana had been emotional, open, and unpredictable. Anne, on the other hand, valued control, order, and restraint. For years, she had believed Diana's power came from her ability to charm people rather than strategy. Standing in that room, Anne began to suspect she had been wrong. She moved slowly, examining the items one by one: dresses from charity events, letters from world leaders, personal notes written in Diana's looping hand. Each piece felt intimate, but none felt dangerous. That was until she saw the box. It sat at the back of a shelf, partially hidden beneath a silk scarf. Unlike the other items, it had been placed with intention, centered, balanced, as if waiting to be found. The jewelry box was made of dark rosewood, polished to a deep shine, even under layers of dust. Mother-of-pearl details lined the edges. Small blue stones were set into the lid. Subtle but deliberate, it was not flashy. It was simple.
Also, that's an interesting metaphor in a way, a close protection officer.
But elegant in the way only royals could be. Anne picked it up and felt the weight immediately. It was too heavy for jewelry alone. She turned it over in her hands, examining the craftsmanship, when something caught her eye. On the inside of the lid, carved so faintly it could be missed if you were not looking for it, were words written in Diana's handwriting. For those who dare seek truth, DS. Anne's breath caught. Not Princess of Wales. Not Diana, Princess of Wales. Just Diana Spencer. Her own name. It felt personal and defiant. The room felt different after that. Had Diana left behind more than just little treasures and dresses? What truth was she talking about? Why would she hide such a secret message inside something so beautiful? Holding the box tightly, Princess Anne knew this was not just a regular gift. It was a puzzle, a message, and maybe even a warning. Whatever was inside was meant for someone brave enough to look past what things seemed to be. Someone who, perhaps too late, finally wished she had asked more questions when there was still time. Anne carried the box to her private quarters later that evening. She did not tell anyone, not her aides or palace staff. Something in her told her this was meant to be done alone. She placed the box on a velvet cloth beneath a reading lamp and stared at it for a long time. She was not a woman given to imagination, but she could not shake the feeling that the box was watching her back. When she opened it, the jewelry inside was indeed exquisite. Hidden inside were earrings made of rare red jewels from Burma, a blue jewel bracelet that sparkled like starlight, and a necklace with green emeralds and diamonds so perfectly cut they seemed to glow from inside. But as Anne looked at each piece, she noticed something strange. Carved into the back of each item were tiny marks, symbols, dates, and initials that didn't match any royal record she had ever seen. She got a magnifying glass and looked at the marks closely. Some looked like directions on a map. Others looked like references, maybe case numbers, maybe dates. One pin had a number that looked like an international bank code. Her forehead wrinkled. These were not just gifts meant to be kept for sentimental reasons. They were clues, like breadcrumbs showing a path. She turned her attention back to the box itself. Her fingers moved naturally over its grooves and panels, her mind thinking about how it was made. Then, by chance, or perhaps it was fate, her thumb pressed against a slightly raised part near the bottom. There was a soft click, and the bottom panel moved just a tiny bit. Anne paused, holding her breath. She slid the panel open.
It could have been way more trouble than it was worth.
On this second day of June, in the year 1953.
What she found was shocking beyond belief. Inside of the panel was a second secret space, shallow but tightly packed. It held a bundle of handwritten letters, old but easy to read, tied with a pale blue ribbon. They smelled a little like lavender. Underneath them lay a group of shiny photographs. Diana was clearly dressed up to look like someone else meeting with people and did not recognize. The places in the pictures were unfamiliar too. Cafes, underground parking garages, private homes. None of it fit the public life the Princess of Wales was known for. Tucked beneath the photographs was a small silver key. Attached was a tag that said, Zurich Deposit Box 837L. Anne stared at it, stunned. Her heart beat harder as she turned back to the letters. Her name, Anne, was written in Diana's looping handwriting on the first envelope. It said, To Anne, please read if I am gone. The date written in the corner made Anne sit down slowly. It had been written 3 days before Diana's death. Her hands were steady when she opened the first letter, but her chest felt tight as she read the opening line. Anne, if you are reading this, then they succeeded in making me quiet. The words did not feel dramatic. They felt controlled and certain, like she knew what was going to happen to her. As Princess Anne read through the hurried letters, her heart grew more alarmed. Diana wrote about a charity gala in 1995, one Anne herself had attended. A respected organization with a strong public image and trusted donors. Diana had noticed discrepancies in funding reports. Money that was meant for hospitals and landmine victims had not arrived. When she asked questions, she was brushed off. When she quietly asked for answers, people avoided her questions, gave her wrong money information, and then even threatened her. The more she looked into it, the deeper the badness seemed to go. Anne turned the page and found a list of numbers written by Diana herself. She had carefully copied numbers, bank transfers, and secret accounts with no names attached. According to Diana's notes, money meant for people hurt by landmines, children's hospitals, and women's shelters had been put into personal bank accounts.
Who have a very difficult task in providing care to patients, some of whom
Some belonged to powerful business owners. Others, which was even more disturbing, were connected to people inside the royal palace. Diana's voice in the letter grew colder, more determined. She wrote about meeting late at night with reporters who looked into stories, one from France, another from Switzerland. They were already finding signs of a larger secret plan. She mentioned code names, secret drop-off places for things, and being watched. She had even started recording her talks, storing the tapes in secret spots. People who knew the truth had come to her in secret, offering papers and telling her what they knew. But they were very scared for their lives. Anne sat back in her chair, her heart pounding, and tears ran down her face. But the letters didn't contain just evidence. Princess Diana also wrote about her sons. "I am not afraid," Diana wrote, "but I will not let them grow up believing the world is kinder than it is." Anne felt her eyes burn. At the bottom of the final page, one line was underlined. "If something happens to me, everything else is secured." Anne's gaze shifted to the silver key. The tag read, "Zurich Deposit Box 837. 2 weeks later, Princess Anne arrived in Switzerland without announcement. The bank was old, quiet, and professional, to the point of coldness. The clerk did not react to her name. He only nodded and led her through security. The box was placed in front of her in a private room. Inside were documents, financial records, copies of transfers, and photographs of meetings Diana was never meant to attend. Audio tapes were labeled by date, but one file stood out, above all others. "If I Disappear." The video showed Diana sitting alone, with no makeup and no performance. "If you are watching this," Diana said calmly, "then I was right to be afraid." She spoke about powerful people, not monsters, but respectable, smiling men who used charity as cover and influence as armor. She spoke about money moving across borders and causes being used as masks. She spoke about being followed and about trusting the wrong people. When the video ended, Anne remained seated for a long time. Then the bank clerk spoke quietly from the doorway. "You are not the first to inquire about this box," he said. Anne looked up. "Someone else came 2 weeks ago," he continued. "They claimed to be family." Anne's fingers closed around the key. The secret Diana left behind was no longer sleeping, and whoever wanted it buried was already awake. Princess Anne did not sleep on the flight back to London. She sat upright, hands folded, eyes fixed on nothing in particular, replaying Diana's voice again and again.
it's always been my concern to touch people with leprosy, trying to show in a simple action.
Not the words alone, but the calm. That was what unsettled her most. Diana had not sounded frightened. She had sounded resolved, like someone who had already accepted the cost of knowing too much. By the time the plane touched down, Anne had made one decision and postponed another. She would not alert the palace, not yet, and she would not destroy what she had found, no matter how strongly instinct told her that silence would be safer. Safety had not saved Diana. The evidence was moved that same night, not to Buckingham Palace, not to Windsor, not to any royal property that could be quietly accessed by others. Anne used a small private residence she kept for rare moments of retreat, a place with no staff and no routine traffic. The documents were locked away, the digital copies stored separately, and the original jewelry box placed back inside its protective case. Anne told herself she was being cautious. In truth, she was afraid, and for the right reasons, because the first sign that she was no longer alone came 3 days later, and it was shocking. Her personal phone, one she used only for close family and long-trusted contacts, began making a faint clicking sound during calls. It was not constant or obvious, just enough to be noticed if you were listening carefully. Anne had spent a lifetime listening carefully. Then came the delays. Letters that should have arrived within a day took a week, some arriving opened and resealed. Others never arrived at all. Her driver mentioned that a vehicle had followed them part of the way home one evening, keeping its distance and never getting close enough to be obvious. Individually, each detail meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern Diana would have recognized instantly. Anne contacted someone she had not spoken to in years, a man who had retired quietly from the British intelligence work and had no interest in returning to anything involving headlines or heroics. He agreed to come, but only on one condition: no names and no written records. What he confirmed was expected. Her phone had been tracked. Her study contained listening devices disguised as power adapters, and a tracker had been placed beneath her car, removed just before it could fail completely. Someone knew she had Diana's evidence, and they wanted to know what she would do with it. It was during this time of growing worry that Anne received a mysterious package with no return address. Inside was only a name: Timothy Radcliffe, Diana's former private helper. Anne remembered him as a quiet man, fiercely loyal, who disappeared from public life after Diana's death. She tracked him to a simple home outside Bath, and he agreed to meet at night in a small church known only to a few. In the dim candlelight of the church, Timothy's face showed years of silence. He didn't waste any time. "Your sister-in-law was not alone," he said. "She trusted a few of us. Even though she knew we had no part in the powerful system, we've kept watch, waiting for someone else brave enough to carry on her fight," and sat in stunned silence as Timothy explained everything clearly. The official investigation into Diana's death had many missing pieces. Proof was ignored, and people who saw things were made to be quiet. Security camera video from Paris had gone missing, and reports of a white Fiat car seen at the accident were ignored for no reason.
Just to confirm the news that Diana, Princess of Wales, has died in a car accident in Paris, which also killed her companion.
It was never meant to be solved, he said, just quietly closed. The heavy weight of it pressed on Anne's shoulders. Diana had died chasing the truth, and now Anne, by stepping into her shadow, had become the new target. Anne asked him the question she had been avoiding since Zurich. Did Diana believe she would be killed? Timothy hesitated, then nodded. She believed she would be stopped. She did not know how to. When Anne returned home that night, she found her study in perfect order. Too perfect. The documents were untouched and the drawers closed. Nothing was stolen, but the jewelry box had been moved, just slightly, enough to be noticed. The message was unmistakable. "We know where it is." Anne sat down heavily, the weight of the situation finally pressing in on her fully. Diana had not only been watched, she had been managed, contained, and neutralized, without ever needing to be named an enemy. And now Anne had inherited the same role. But that was only the beginning. Over the following days, she worked methodically. She mapped the financial trails Diana had identified, cross-checking them with public records and timelines. There were charities that looked clean on paper but moved money in strange cycles, boards filled with familiar names, and events where optics mattered more than outcomes. Diana's landmine campaign appeared again and again in her notes. It wasn't there because it was dangerous, but because it was inconvenient. It disrupted supply chains and brought attention to places where attention was bad for business. The more Anne read, the clearer it became. Diana had not been reckless. She had been effective, and effectiveness is unforgivable when it threatens power. One folder from Zurich was labeled in red ink, Operation Marionette. Inside were communications between private security firms and foreign intermediaries. The language was coded, polite, and sanitized, but the meaning was clear enough. Control the narrative, limit exposure, and neutralize deviation. Diana's name appeared only once, as a risk factor. Anne closed the folder and pressed her palms flat against the desk. She had spent her life believing the monarchy survived because it adapted, but Diana's work suggested something darker, that survival had sometimes meant sacrifice. That night, Anne recorded a message of her own. She did not name names or make accusations. She spoke plainly and carefully, describing what she had found, what she feared, and what Diana had believed. She saved copies in 3 separate locations as insurance. The next morning, she received a call from a senior palace official requesting an urgent private meeting with no explanation and no agenda, just urgency. Anne dressed carefully, choosing neutral colors and controlled lines, armor disguised as fabric. As she entered the room, she noticed the absence of warmth immediately. There was no small talk and no pleasantries, only concerned faces and careful language. "We understand you have been looking into some old matters," one of them said. Anne met his gaze without blinking. "I understand those matters were never resolved," she replied. Silence stretched between them. Another voice spoke, softer and more dangerous. "Some truths do not bring justice, they bring damage." Anne thought of Diana's handwriting, the urgency, and the restraint. "I think," Anne said slowly, "that damage was already done. The question is whether we continue pretending it was not." She left the meeting knowing two things with absolute certainty. They were afraid, and they would not stop. Somewhere Diana's voice lingered, not as a warning, but as a challenge. She had dared to seek truth. Anne would have to decide whether daring again was worth the cost, and whether the world was finally ready to hear what Diana had tried to say.
I understood the media might be interested in what I did.
Princess Anne understood something the others in that room did not. Power did not panic unless it felt exposed. For the first time since Diana's death, exposure was no longer theoretical. The days after that meeting moved strangely, not fast nor slow. Every conversation felt measured. Every phone call felt monitored. Anne noticed how often people tried to redirect her attention towards safer, ceremonial duties, distractions wrapped in tradition. It only confirmed what she already knew. They wanted her busy, not thinking. But her determination was alarming. She refused to be distracted. Instead, she worked quietly. The evidence Diana left behind was no longer treated as history. Anne treated it as a living thing that could still move and change outcomes. She reread the letters again and again, noticing patterns she had missed before. Diana repeated certain phrases when she was afraid and underlined dates when she believed something irreversible was coming. She left gaps on purpose, places where she assumed someone smarter or braver would fill in the rest. One letter stood apart, shorter than the others, with no emotion or reflection, just instructions. If they try to turn you into the villain, it means you are close. Do not argue with them. Let them underestimate you. The truth survives quite better than noise. Anne closed the letter slowly. For the first time, she allowed herself to cry. These were not the soft public tears Diana had been criticized for. These were private, controlled tears of someone realizing how deeply wrong she had been about another human being. Diana had not been naive. She had been alone. Anne wiped her face and stood. The choice was no longer whether to act, but how. Going public would end one way. The palace would deny, the press would fracture, and doubt would flood everything. Diana's evidence would be dismissed as paranoia, grief, or instability, the same playbook used against her for years. Anne needed leverage, not volume. She contacted two people Diana had trusted but never fully revealed herself to: a former investigative journalist who left the profession in the late 90s, and a financial analyst specializing in tracing hidden money flows between charities and shell organizations. Both agreed to meet only after Anne sent them copies of documents Diana had written in her own hand. Within hours, both responded, "This is real, and it was buried on purpose." They worked independently with no shared communication and no central location. Anne insisted on separation. If one thread was cut, the others would survive. Diana had planned this. Anne simply executed it better. What emerged over weeks was devastating in its clarity. Diana had uncovered a network that exploited the image of charity to move money and influence. It used humanitarian work as camouflage and relied on reputations so polished no one would dare question them. It survived because the monarchy itself provided cover. Not by design, but by inertia. Diana was dangerous because she disrupted that inertia. She asked the wrong questions, refused to stay decorative, and moved freely across borders in ways that made tracking her difficult. Worst of all, people trusted her. Anne realized something chilling. Diana had not died because she was weak. She had died because she was effective. But the warnings were far from ending. The next warning arrived in a different form. A senior family member requested a private dinner with no staff and no record. The tone was almost gentle. "We are worried about you," they said. "This path will isolate you." Anne smiled politely. "I have been isolated before. It did not stop me," she replied. The conversation circled with concern, masquerading as care, subtle reminders of duty, stability, and what might be lost if certain truths were pursued. Finally, the mask slipped. "Diana did not understand the consequences," the voice said quietly. Anne leaned forward. "No," she replied. "She understood them perfectly. That is why she documented everything where I saw." The silence that followed was absolute. That night, Anne made the final decision. She would not be the face of the revelation. She would be the bridge. The evidence would be released slowly and surgically through institutions that could not be dismissed as emotional or biased: financial regulators, international watchdog groups, and independent courts outside Britain's influence. Diana had feared exposure would endanger her sons, but Anne understood something Diana had not lived long enough to see. Silence had not protected them either. Before anything was released, Princess Anne recorded one last message, not for the public, but for William and Harry. She spoke plainly. No accusations, no drama, just facts, context, and a truth that could not be hidden anymore. "Your mother was not broken," she said. "She was silenced, and she did not stop trying." She stored the message where it could not be intercepted. When the first report surfaced months later, it did not mention Diana at all. It focused on financial discrepancies, misused funds, and regulatory failures. Names appeared slowly and carefully, enough to trigger investigations, but not enough to allow deflection. The palace issued statements of concern, surprise, and cooperation. Behind closed doors, panic spread. When Diana's handwriting finally appeared in the public record, it did not come with accusations. It came with receipts. The narrative shifted, not overnight or cleanly, but permanently. People began asking the question Diana had died asking: who benefits is buried. Anne watched from a distance as the world reevaluated a woman it had once reduced to headlines and emotions. Diana was no longer just the people's princess. She was something more unsettling. She had been right, and the most dangerous thing Diana left behind was not evidence. It was courage. The jewelry box returned to its place eventually, cleaned and restored, its message still hidden where only someone looking for truth would ever find it, for those who dare seek truth. Anne dared, and for the first time in decades, the silence around Diana's death began to crack.
Diana, Princess of Wales, has been killed in a car accident.
Not from noise, but from pressure applied exactly where it hurt most. This was not revenge, it was completion. And the truth, long delayed, finally had someone who refused to let it be buried again. Are you a lover of the royal family? Leave a word for them and remember to share your opinions with us in the comments section. If you enjoyed the video, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Also, click the following video on your screen, and you will enjoy it.